What's going on, everyone? Jack here from Half Chrome, and this is my Moblite7. And I know it does not look like the Moblite7 you've come to know and love. And I've done some upgrades, I've done some work on this thing, and I like it a little bit more than I did before. And I really did like it before. You know, a 10-minute flight time is impressive. So I've done a few things here, and I'll tell you about what I've done. And hey, you want to try it? Pretty darn easy. So, stay tuned. All right, so when I woke up yesterday, it was minus 2 degrees, and I thought, well, good thing I'm staying inside to do some indoor flying, some whooping. And I thought that was bad. This morning I woke up, it was minus 11. That's like minus 24 Celsius, right? So cold. So you definitely want a tiny whoop. And this Moblite7 is fantastic. You can get up to 10 minutes of flight time, but a lot of people don't like the exposed flight controller. So you can see one of the things I did was add a canopy. This canopy actually came from the UZ85, and you know, there's a Moblite canopy. There's a lot of canopies that will just fit the bill. You kind of have to pick the one that you think works best for you. I like this one because I have 4 mounting points for it. It just kind of keeps the camera nice and stable. Plus, it's easier for me to adjust the camera angle. The other super obvious mod that I did was add 3-blade propellers. Now, I generally find 3 or 4 blade propellers give me a little bit more grip than a 2-blade, right? And that's kind of consistent with the physics. The 2-blade props have less drag, so they tend to be a little bit faster, but they also won't give you that grip that you maybe are looking for. So you can kind of decide whether or not you want 2 or 3-blade propellers. These 3 blades are a little bit heavy. Now, I don't necessarily recommend these gem fans that I picked up, and the reason is they fit really tight, and I broke a motor shaft trying to get one of them off. Somebody put the propellers on for me, Chris, and one of them was on wrong, and I broke it. So I had to replace the motors there. I also replaced the frame because I did crack it once. And you know what? I don't know if you know this, but this frame is actually glow in the dark, which is pretty cool. So, you know, it's kind of one of those standard, if you keep it by a light, the more bright it'll glow. So if you're looking for something to fly outside in the dark, maybe in a basement like I've been flying, pretty cool that this frame glows in the dark. Actually, both the frames that you get with this thing glow in the dark, so that's cool. Now, you do get 2 frames when you order a Moblite7, and before you swap it, let it break a few times and pick up some of this welder glue. This stuff is fantastic. I've been using it for years on whoops, and it's better than super glue or crazy glue because it has a little bit of give to it. So super glue or crazy glue really is pretty rigid and doesn't have that flex that you will get with some welded glue. This stuff is fantastic. Now, if you're trying to decide between the 6 and the 7, you know, the big difference is more flight time with the 7, better handling with the 6. And you know, the big reason that the 7 doesn't handle quite as well is because it's heavier. Now, it's not a whole lot heavier, but one thing you could do is try different batteries. So I tested 4 different batteries for flight time and characteristics in flight, and my results were pretty predictable, but still good to know. So this was the smallest battery I tested. It was a 300 milliamp hour from URUAV, a 4080C battery, and I did really like the way this thing flew, and I got about 5 minutes of flight time. The next battery I tested, a little bit bigger, 350 milliamp hour battery. This is GNB 30 to 60C, and I got about 5 minutes and 30 seconds on this. And you know what? I got a ton of these eSheen 450s. These are 80C, yep, 8160C batteries. And this gave me about 6.5 minutes of flight. And I really kind of liked the way that this thing performed. And I think the C rating there is part of it, right? So C rating is kind of the constant flow of amps that you get, and the higher the C rating, basically the more consistent the flow of energy will be to your quad. So higher C rating will kind of drain the battery at a more consistent or higher rate as well. Lower C rating, you're not going to get quite the power pulling through. Now also, the PH2 connector kind of limits that a little bit, so maybe a BT 2.0 or a GNB 27 actually might be a better choice. Now, I haven't tested that, and maybe I'll do that in the future. Then it came down to this stock 650. Now, without my mobs, I got 10 minutes. Now, after modding it, adding, I think maybe 2.5 grams of weight, my flight time was down to about 9 minutes. Now, there are a lot of things that factor into flight time, but weight is certainly going to be one of them. So you are going to lose a little bit of flight time, but if you ask me, it just flies better with those 3-blade props. And I like the protection that the canopy adds. So, you kind of have to decide, is one less minute of flight time when you're getting 9 still going to be pretty okay for you? Well, if you ask me, I would say yes, but you got to make that call. So also there's the ESC firmware for your ESCs. Now people have been getting better flight times flying it, so I thought, hey, I'll try that too. So I flashed that firmware to my Moblite7, and you know what? It does improve flight times. Now, it wasn't incredible or crazy improvements, but you know what? You're getting 10, 20, 30 seconds extra on a battery, and that makes a difference, right? So I was able to get about 9 minutes and 30 seconds on that same 650 when I was flying on the ESC firmware. Now, was every single flight longer? Actually, about 75% of them were, from the packs that I was comparing, from the smaller ones to the larger ones. I tested all 4 sizes again, and again, consistently, I was getting slightly better flight times. So if you want to update your ESC firmware, I'll walk you through it. Now, I already did it on this one, so I'll show you how to do it on the Moblite6, but really, these are pretty much the same thing, and the process is identical. All right, so we're going to take a look at this thing in flight in my ugly basement, but I do have some nice little hoops and things that I'll fly through. I'll do some cruising, I'll do some speed runs, I'll bother the children, and ultimately I'll just kind of fly it, right? So this is the Moblite7 with all of the upgrades, the modifications that I've done, right? So I have the canopy on here, I'm flying on the tri-blade props, and I'm using that ESC firmware, right? I did some testing to see, do I like all of these things? And the answer is yes. I like the tri-blade props. I feel like it makes it a little bit more nimble. I get a better throttle response. I can turn a little bit better. I do like the canopy. I can adjust my camera angle a little bit easier, plus it protects that flight controller. Now both of those things come with the added cost of weight, so I'm losing some flight time there. So I've added the ESC firmware to kind of get a little bit of that back. So does the ESC firmware give me more flight time? Well, the answer is yes, it does. Does it on every single flight? The answer is no. Flight time is so dependent on how you're flying, where you're flying. Did you charge your batteries all the way? There are a lot of things that factor into flight time. So, while I can tell you that most of the time, I think you're probably going to do better with the ESC firmware. It's not a slam dunk 100% of the time, but you know what? It is better. So you probably should do it if you feel comfortable flashing the firmware. Now you can see I've sped this video up. I didn't want you to have to sit through 9.5 minutes of flight time, which is what I'm getting with this ESC firmware. Now keep in mind, before I flashed the firmware, I was getting about 9 minutes if I really push that battery. And now I can push the battery and get about 9.5 minutes. So I'm getting a few seconds here and there, depending on, which battery I'm using. But the ESC firmware does help. Now keep in mind, the stock Moblite7 would give me about 10 minutes. So it's still not quite up to par. But again, I've done some modifications that I think make this a better flying drone, and it's protected now, right? The flight controller is. So you got to kind of weigh that in. I've also done some things in beta flight, changing the angle limit as well as the angle strength. I think it flies a little bit better that way. But you can kind of do the mods that you think work best for you. So I've been chasing the kids around the basement here. They finally got off their phones. They play that Among Us game where they kind of forget like the world is around them, and they're in the same room playing the same game on those tiny little screens. So whatever. But now they're on the swing of the rings and the hoverboard. They're running around the basement having a good old time. As am I, right? Love flying whoops, especially on cold days. So, do you want the Moblite6? Do you want the Moblite7? They're both excellent drones. They both have really good flight time. The 6 is a little bit more nimble. than the 7, even with some of these mods, right? They share the same F4 flight controller. They share the same 0802 motors. You know, they're very similar quads, just different size, which ends up being different flight time. So you can see this is me. I tried to push it a little bit longer, and then at the end of the day, 9.5 minutes on that 650 milliamp hour battery. Now, another thing you're going to want to do that I didn't do on either of my Moblite 6 or 7 is kind of secure this antenna out of the way of the propellers. That little whip on both of mine got cut off, so that's going to limit my range in the future. I had this one coming out the top of the canopy, and for my Moblite 6, I added a little bit of welder glue and kind of glued it around the back of the duct there, and that keeps it out of the way. So changes inside of Betaflight that I did make, I went ahead and changed the angle limit to 60 degrees. That just allows it to pitch a little bit more, right? I get all the way to that 60-degree angle. I can fly a little bit faster, a little bit more aggressively. Now, I don't generally fly at 60 degrees, but that kind of allows me to recover just a little bit more. I also like to bump up the angle strength somewhere between 90 and 100. And what that does is when I'm flying in angle mode, and all these flights indoors in my basement here are in angle mode, and when it snaps back to level, it just snaps back a little bit quicker, which I tend to like. You'll also see that I'm flying with a rubber band on here. You know, that's because I'm flying different batteries, and the smaller ones didn't, you know, kind of stay in that little slot, so I cut it off and added a rubber band. You know, that's kind of negligible in terms of weight, but it does allow me to switch batteries a little bit easier, and I don't have to worry about sticking a piece of foam or something in there to keep those batteries from falling out. The rubber band does just well enough, and you know what, it's pretty darn lightweight. All right, I'm going to show you how to set up the JESC software for your ESCs if you want. I obviously already did for the 7. I'm going to walk you through how to do it on my 6. Process is the same. So first you need the JESC configurator, link in the video description down below if you want to download it. Then you're going to go ahead and plug your quad in via a micro USB cable. And you'll see it's very similar to Betaflight. And then I'm going to get a connect. I'm going to go ahead and connect. And then I'm going to read setup. Now, I'm going to need to power my ESCs. Notice it didn't let me do that, so I got to go ahead and plug in a battery. Now, I highly suggest you take your propellers off. I'm a little gun shy since I broke the motors. With a tiny quad like this, it's not quite as important, but still important. Don't do as I'm doing. So I'm going to hold this thing in my left hand. Now I can read the setup, and you can see that it's connecting. Okay, so from here, the first thing you want to check is to see that you have the H in the middle. If it's an L or something else, just stop. This isn't going to work for you. All right, so now what I'm going to do here is just flash all, right? It's going to put this JESC firmware on there, and I get to choose which version. Now, I'm going to go with the JESC 2.3 on H only, 48 kilohertz PWM, recommended for whoops. That's what I'm flying. And I'm going to click flash. And it's going to run through flashing my firmware. All right, so now we're set up, and I'm going to go ahead and disconnect. So now when I plug in, I get a slightly different tone. And actually those tones are customizable. And it wants me to, it's beeping because it's not connected to my remote. Now you're going to want to double check to make sure that the motors are all spinning in the right direction. And if they're not, right, if for some reason that messed up your motor direction, you can switch the motor direction right back here in the JESC configurator. All right, that little tab that said motor direction, you just make it reverse for any of them that you need to reverse. So when it comes down to it, what do I recommend you do? Well, that kind of depends on your comfort level with messing with this quad. If you're not comfortable with Betaflight or JESC or any of that, don't mess with it, right? I would particularly stay away from the JESC if you haven't done any of that stuff. Not that it's difficult, but I have in the past ruined quads trying to update firmware and stuff like that. So don't bother if that kind of worries you. Now I do suggest you go into beta flight and try the angle strength thing. See if you like that. Bump it up a little bit, change the angle limits, see if that works for you. A propeller switch is pretty easy. Again, don't get these super tight ones that I found, but you can try different propeller combinations and see what works best for you. Now, I like the tri-blades because it gives me just a little bit more grip, or at least I feel that it does. Adding a canopy is really pretty easy. Now, I had this laying around. You probably don't, right? But you can pick one up pretty inexpensively, and I'll have links down in the description below if you're looking for one of these. But really, the easiest thing to do is grab some different batteries and try the different weights and see how you like the flight characteristics. Like I said, a lighter battery is going to make your quad just a little bit more nimble. The sacrifice there is going to be flight time. So hopefully this was helpful. You do what you got to do to make your Moblite7 the best quad it can be. And if you haven't already, check us out on halfchrome.com. And you know what? We're giving away drones monthly to our Patreon subscribers. And we do a lot of that on our live streams, which we're moving to Sunday night. So you got to kind of keep on your toes. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that so you don't miss those live streams. With life changing, we haven't been able to find a super consistent day. And hopefully Sunday evenings is going to be the magic day. Anyway, good luck and happy flying.